you have been really intensely over a lot of data around the area of deaths, especially which also will focus on, plus more in just a minute. But can I just go back to the start of the whole COVID thing? What drew you in, apart from your interest in figures and analysis, which would be normal, but what's not normal is to dive into this and to get quite public on it. So I'm just curious to know, what was the trigger point for you, why you've done what you've done, and then we'll get into what you've actually found and continue to find.
Okay, Eddie, thanks for having me on. I don't know how I got here. This is 2 years later, but back in 2022, I was watching all that was going on, people talking about excess deaths and that there was none in 2020 and all this stuff. And I'd seen people talking about RIP.ie. Now, I had a link with RIP.ie, an email, so any deaths in Kilkenny would be sent to me. And I noticed that anecdotally, there was more coming in. So I was aware, I didn't fall for the scam at the start. I can't say I knew the vaccine was going to cause problems or anything like that. But when people started talking about the mortality building up in 2022 from 2021, I went into RIP.ie and started analysing basically the Kilkenny figures. And that's what started me. And I put together 3 or 4 months, and from memory, I think the figures showed an increase of between 25 and 30%. Now, I know that's only a small batch, but it gave me something to go on.
Just so for people who are coming to this for the first time, I know it's a pretty fundamental thing, but can you just describe the difference between RIP.ie and how it gets its data and why it's such an important primary source versus, say, the CSO, which is, 6 months behind a lot of the time, and that the data timing and differences between the two. Can you just maybe comment on that? Just why RIP.ie? Why not the CSO?
Well, why not the CSO is what you just said. They release quarterly figures, and now at the time they released them, they were 5 months behind, and they were only the deaths registered in the month. So it wasn't the deaths actually occurred in the month. There could be 5,000 deaths registered in a quarter, but you would not know what period they related to. So for comparison purposes, it was of no benefit. Then,
in other words, to get into the CSO data, you have to register a death. And so therefore, for example, we're in 2024 now, so 2023 deaths might be appearing in the 2024 register.
Oh, definitely.
Whereas RIP.ie is literally in the moment, because the first thing you do is you go onto RIP.ie if you're handling it, if you're an undertaker or you're somebody who's familiar with the system, and you input the information. So it's raw, it's primary, but it's accurate. Is that?
It's accurate. It's real time mortality data, Eddie. And the reason it works is nearly every death ends up in RIP.ie. The CSO have done analysis, and I think from memory, they say it's between 95 and 97% of deaths end up in RIP.ie, and they end up in RIP.ie within 1 to 2 days, something like that. So it's real time data. And
can I ask you, RIP.ie? I mean, I know it's a bit, it's not an area we all like to be reading about, but I mean, it's a wonderful system. I mean, who is it privately owned, or how's it run? Who came up with it?
I think a brother and sister, I can't remember their names, set it up back in, I think it was 2010 or 2011, and it was a slow starter. But from about 2012, 13, 14 on, I spoke to a local undertaker, and he said every death, as far as he concerned, goes into RIP.ie. People just opt for it. Now, not every death will, because I think it's a uniquely Irish thing. We want to know, it's not that we're more cognizant of family and all that, but yourself, funerals in Irish life are a big thing. So when this facility came along, people use it when their own people die and to see what's going on in their locality.
But I mean, I think the point is as well is, look, this is not a state-run database. In other words, it's not corruptible by state forces. I'm not saying the CSOs, by the way, to how to respect them. I'm just simply saying it's not politically motivated system anyway.
It's not, Eddie, and they say on the site, every death that has been put on it is still on it and searchable. And you have to take them at their word. The only thing I will say is the Irish Times bought it last year for a astronomical sum. So let's hope there's no interference there.
Okay. So just go back to 2022. You were looking at the Kilkenny data, and then you obviously broadened out your analysis.
Yeah, I did. What got me into going public is a local journalist in Kilkenny, Jimmy Rattigan, had an online paper. He was the only one. I contacted all the local papers, radios. He was the only one.
Why? What was it that you saw that caused you alarm? What was the number? What was it?
I think it was 30% excess deaths. It was off maybe only comparing 4 or 5 months. But I looked at sudden deaths as well, and I came up with something like 100% for that. Now that can be hard to analyse because you're going in looking at condolences for people saying, I'm sorry to hear about the sudden death of your so-and-so. So people can dispute them figures, but I treated every year the same. I treated like with like, and the sudden deaths it might be like there might have been 5 in the period and it was gone up to 10 or something like that. But we were showing differences, and he agreed to publish it. And when he published it, one local community radio station asked me on, and I spoke to them, and my name had to go public at that stage. There was no point in the Jimmy Rattigan said to me, "You're either got to put up or shut up. You can't be hiding behind something." So I did, and from there, different people ran with my stuff online and it was on Twitter. I wasn't on Twitter at the time, and I went into Substack in, I think it was 2023, and that's when I started publishing my own stuff and writing articles on it.
Okay, and so let's just go back then, right? So. Come forward from then, right, to today. So what if you were meeting somebody on the street and you were going to offer a cup of coffee and say, Jesus, Patrick, what a year after finding, how would you describe it to them?
How would I describe it? I think I try to keep this as simple as I can, Eddie, because sometimes people, and they're on the same side as me, get into analysing the age of people and this, that and the other. RIP.ie is blunt data. The person is dead or are not dead. If they're on the site, they're dead. We don't know their age. We don't really know why they died. It's like a binary operation. So when I talk to people about this, I just say there's this amount of people extra dying since this period compared to before the pandemic. There's something strange.
Can I chop in there? No, that's a very, very interesting point. I know this is all old hat to you, but I'm trying to help the audience and myself learn this in little bites. So RIP.ie doesn't distinguish between age. It just says you're either alive or dead, and if you're dead, you're in the database.
Yes,
generally speaking, and it's broken down by county, as I recall.
Yes.
Okay, and it's a forever database. It doesn't get cleaned out after a few years, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so somebody like you can take raw data out of that, and then you can spreadsheet it and do analysis.
Well. Eddie, I wish I could. I did it with Kilkenny because Kilkenny was a small county. Then other people got in touch with me who were way more tech savvy and could do exactly what you were talking about. Take it out with spreadsheets on a national basis and analyse it by county and stuff like that.
Can I just ask you? Yeah, can I just ask you then one technical thing that's been on my mind on it, and that's that if we never had COVID and the drama that's happened, and we'll get into all of that. The Irish population itself would be ageing a little every year, so you would expect a kind of a gentle, incremental change upwards in the percentage of people that might be dying in the population relative to the year before. Almost imperceptible, but it would be happening as a trend. That's not what you found.
Yes, that's correct. No. What happened was in 2020, there was from 2015 to 2019, it was a very steady. It might change 400 or 500 from year to year, and actually went down in 1 year in between. 2018, I think, there was a strong flu that winter, so that affected things. Right. But from those 2015 to 2019, there was a small increase, but not much. In 2020,
we've moved now to talk about national figures, I presume, in your comments.
Yes. Okay. So in 2020. The figures went up about 1,500 compared to the 5-year average before that. Now that's about 5%. Now when I talk about that year, obviously that's the pandemic year. There's one thing that has to be addressed. Like there was 1,000 extra deaths in April 2020.
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah.
When it's so much of an outlier. It's just what happened is not real. I can sure
that was largely elderly people.
Yes.
move from hospitals back to nursing homes, and
yes,
and we had a bit of a disaster, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
And so that was a blip then.
Yeah.
Okay, in April, and that jumps out.
And that jumps out, and that makes the 2020 figures look a bit higher than they actually are. I'll just give you an idea that April 2020, the deaths in April 2020 were about 3,700, and the highest nearest to that in the previous years was 2,600. So there's about 1,100 of a jump. It just completely stands out, and it has to do with the people being transferred from the hospital, the elderly, from the hospitals to the nursing homes.
Mostly, yeah. Okay, and well, yeah, it does. I mean, there may be other numbers in there, but I'd imagine that most people would understand. Yeah, that makes sense. So go on anyway. So that's 2020. We've no vaccine. Things are, we're now social distancing. We're wearing our masks. We're sticking to our geographic location. You can't get in here. You can't get in there. You're applying for your vaccine passport, your yellow pass or leopard pass, as I call it, to get around the place. And, things started to get normalised. And most people started to get vaccinated in 2021, 2022. So what happens when the vaccines start to go into the arm?
Okay. The vaccines start going into the arms, we say, from November, December 20 onwards for the elderly.
Yeah. Yeah.
In January and February 2021, we again had a massive spike in deaths. There's been research done on this saying, connecting it to the elderly in the nursing homes. Again, we had a massive increase, over 1,000 in those 2 months, compared to what would normally happen. Now, describe
massive to me in percentage terms. What kind of a jump happened?
Well, you're talking about in 2021 for January, February, there was 7,400 deaths in those 2 months. The nearest figure to that in the year surrounding would be, we'll put it this way: in January, February 2020, there was 5,600.
Okay.
That gives you an idea. The nearest figure to that was back in 2018 when it was 6,400. So you can see it jumped out massively.
Okay. So there was hundreds, if not more than hundreds, of extra deaths that are inexplicable.
Yeah.
Okay. And because RIP.ie doesn't tell you how, what's causing death. They're just, if you're in there, you're dead.
Yeah. But what it does, Eddie, it will tell you if the person died in a nursing home. And research was done on this.
Because of the location.
Yeah.
Death.
And people who I know, and this research is online, they actually went to the bother. Sorry, the bother is the wrong word. They showed great courage in doing this. They looked up the deaths of people who were dying in that period, saw the nursing home they were in, contacted these nursing homes under the basis of doing a research, and said, when are you expecting to get the vaccine? So the people in there were told them when we had the pharmacists in, whatever, and they gave a date, and they were able to track the deaths for those particular nursing homes into RIP.ie. And
so they reversed it, going from the nursing home back into RIP.ie.
Yeah. Now they didn't do them all, but they did serious research on it, and you could see if the pharmacy was in one day, the deaths started coming on in the week or two afterwards.
Okay, can we just pause here for a second, because that's very, very significant. So in January, February 2021, a few months after the vaccine, within weeks of the vaccination of the elderly, which were the first cohort to get the vaccine, it looks as if there was a significant number of the deaths, the excess deaths that occurred. Leave aside how we define excess deaths scientifically, just for this, we're talking. I know, like, neither of us are scientific statisticians, right? But we're just critical thinkers with a lot of
exactly.
Trying to use common sense. So therefore, there's a surge in January, February 2021 that coincides with the delivery of the first lot of vaccines which were given to elderly people, and the research that was done painstakingly by these people indicate that a lot of those died in nursing homes.
That's it, exactly, Eddie. And 2021 was a strange year. At that stage, I wasn't really researching. It's only when I go back and look at it. But there was that big jump in January, February 2021. And then things kind of evened out.
Okay.
But then from July, August onwards, when the 95% of the population, I think, had got their first 2 doses, I think by July or August. And from then on, things started kicking in. And the deaths...
Okay, when you say things start kicking in, just put some flesh on the bones of that.
Well, what happens, we end up at the end of 2021. Now, I'm quoting RIP.ie figures, and we end up with about 36,000 deaths per RIP.ie.
Okay.
Now, the average for 2015 to 2019 was about 31,300. So that's an excess about 4,500 for the year.
Yeah, less what might have naturally happened.
Exactly.
As the population aged, yeah.
But exactly, I could tell you a figure that I would put on that, but other people might put another figure on it. But yeah. The reason I don't get into that too much, and I know it is important. You can't dismiss the fact that a certain amount of people would have died. But it tends to muddy the waters with some people. And
no, it's an excuse. That's an aging effect. But look, listen, can only appeal to people using their cop on. I mean, if people want to remain in cognitive dissonance, let them.
Yeah.
But I mean, like the book that I'm bringing out and the interviews around all this are going to the people in the middle that are on the verge of waking up, so using their cop on. So just to summarise, right? So
can I give you just 2 start figures?
The rolling average, just so that just clarify. I'm just repeating back what you've said so far. And then please fire ahead. The rolling average kind of number for the years leading up to all of this was around 31,300 thereabouts.
Yes.
And suddenly there's a surge in 2021 corresponding, which is the year that most people ended up getting a double dose of the vaccine. Suddenly we're up at around 36,000.
That's right.
Okay, go ahead.
Now, and just to show how stark it is, the figure for per RIP.ie in 2019 was 32,200 roughly.
Yeah.
And as you just said, we're up at 35,900 in 2021 in the space of a year.
Okay.
That's a massive jump, and there is no matter how quickly the population is getting old, that it just can't explain that.
No. So go
So that works out. Those figures work out at about between 14 and 15%, Eddie. And again, like you say, you have to factor in a certain amount of the people would have died anyway because of old age.
Yeah.
We move on to 2022, and I'll just give you the figure that's coming out, because it's not that there was any big surge in any part of the year. The final figure for 2022 was just under 37,000, which will be 1,000 up on 2021.
Okay.
And that's about 18% up on that rolling average.
And I mean that is not consistent with an aging population.
No.
Just having an incremental increase in the death rate.
And since you're mentioning the aging population, and again, I think I might have sent this to you. After the 2016 census, the CSO did projections for mortality for 2017 to 2051. Now, I know there are any projections, but they had the population breakdown after the census, the age of the population, and presumably the up-to-date actuarial data. And for the years 2017 onwards, first 6 or 7 years, every year they're adding about, I think there's maximum 700 deaths on a year. Some years there's only 300 or 400. So that's all you're talking about, really, that they were expecting to die.
Okay.
Now, another red herring that's thrown into this. Sorry, the aging population isn't a red herring. It just muddies the waters. But the other red herring is the growing population. Now, we all know the growing population is not old people arriving here to die in Ireland. The increasing population is whatever you want to call it, refugees, economic migrants in their 20s.
Yeah, healthy. Yeah.
Healthy, exactly, healthy. And on the other side, the Irish people who have taken a double dose of the jibber jabber juice are leaving the country in extraordinary numbers. So you have a kind of a switch in out there going on. The population mightn't be changing too much. It is going up, but the the people who've taken the vaccine are going down. They've moved on. That's my theory anyway.
And what's it looking like then for 2023?
Well, in 2023 was a repeat of 2022, more or less 37,000, which comes out at about 18%.
And 2024?
2024 up to the end of October, we were just over 18%. And I was talking to one of the lads. He's actually
But does that suggest that 2024 in total will be higher than 18%, or is that the kind of
no? That's a rolling thought on 2024.
Rolling number, right?
Yeah, okay. And one of the lads he looks every 2 weeks, and he said November he sees actually a serious fall in November, which he says is going back to 2020 figures, which might be indicative of something which should have happened a long time ago. I mean, maybe we could talk about it. It's a pull forward effect. Where
there may be an explanation for that on the basis that the actual, if you look at the mRNA vaccine, and I'm not saying anything that's not supported by evidence from studies now throughout the world. The mRNA vaccine, if you look at the impact of it, there's excess deaths, which we've been talking about. We haven't talked about disabilities, and we haven't talked about harms and the data that's coming through there, but that the actual impact of the deaths, the excess deaths, should begin to wane off.
Yes,
should begin to plateau and then wane off naturally, because the Grim Reaper has done his job from the impact on the immune system of the mRNA, bringing it down, and then people picking up all of these illnesses perhaps prematurely and passing away tragically. But that's consistent with that. But I know on your website you drew attention to the work being done by Edward Dowd, who heads an analysis on all of the global data with his team. He's based in Hawaii, ex-Wall Street hedge fund manager and an analyst. Looking at data, looking at testing it out, and so on, with a team of people. And from what I just to summarize his findings, he is suggesting, one of the things I find interesting, I'm putting this to you as a question, his data is indicating that the excess deaths from all-cause mortality deaths in the United States, 21 to 23, the years that we're talking about, was something like 1.14 million in the population of the United States. Now, if you divide that by 60, you come up with a number of 19,000. And what's interesting, that's a 19,000 divided by 60 brings it to roughly to about an Irish size. Again, this isn't exactly top of the head stuff, but it's not pure science, but it's close enough. And then, if his data, what's interesting about his data set, which is very deep, his data set is almost precisely the same as between the United States and the UK next door. And there's no reason, other than adjusting for a slightly younger population in Ireland, for the Irish experience to be any different from the UK experience. So what I find interesting about the division of 60 is that it brings it down to roughly US numbers. It brings it down to roughly an Irish population size, not in terms of the average age or anything like that, just an Irish population size of around 19,000 for excess deaths over a 3-year period.
And that's sort of the figure we're coming up with. And
isn't that interesting? You know what I mean?
I never thought of it that, Eddie, and all the figures I'm looking at, I never actually thought of doing it like that. And that's that's kind of enlightening to hear it, because one of these things where people say, they can't get their head around that this could be happening. But the fact of the matter, Eddie, is it's happening in America. Japan has a serious problem. Australia, New Zealand. The British have changed their way of recording excess deaths so they can hide it. The big question should be, if we weren't suffering excess deaths, they should be all coming to us and saying, what did you do right? I mean, we would be the odd ones out.
No, I agree with all of that, but just to stick with the hard data for a moment, Patrick, if I may, Dowd then he lets the data speak for itself, but obviously he puts it through pretty rigorous processes within his own organisation for all these PhDs in statistics, right? And they're saying that if you take the excess deaths, the ratio of people disabled from the mRNA vaccine, relative to excess deaths, is 4 for every 1 excess death. 4. So disability then is something that I'm asking doctors about. What do you mean by disabilities? And, there's all sorts of definitions of what that is, but it's pretty bloody unpleasant stuff, and it's pretty bloody permanent. And then, so that would then mean that if you take the death rate in America at that level, then and you apply that to the global data set, you end up with 5.5 billion people vaccinated. You end up with deaths, depending on whose data set you want to go with, ranging somewhere between 7 and 15 million. Could be as high as 19 million, 20 million in some estimates. And then that would then put the number of people disabled globally at somewhere between 29 million and 60 million. And these are staggering numbers, because you're dealing with a staggering number of people jabbed, which is 5.5 billion. And that the number of people harmed represents, again, based on the Pfizer study and based on the actual reports coming through, looks as if it's around 18%. Roughly, you can round it as 1 in 5 of the people that took the vaccine were harmed in some way by it. Now, this is very, very significant, and it's. I just find it fascinating that the excess death rate is now levelling off, but the actual disability level is going to carry forward, because they're not dead. These are people that are alive and disabled and are going to cost the health system and families into the future, and it's not even being discussed.
Yeah, I don't even know if those figures can be got in Ireland, Eddie, because I doubt is able to get them in England. Whatever way the system they pay out on disability, the Irish system is so fragmented. I'm not so sure we could even put figures together like that. But I don't doubt them for a second, because we see it all around us. People who are ill, like people telling you, oh, so and so is out of work for the last 6 to 8 weeks, and they're not out with a dose of the flu. They're out with some serious health problem, and it's all over the place. I mean, our health service wasn't able to handle things before the pandemic came along, and now
I was talking very recently to Dr. Claire Craig, in the UK pathologist, who's you've met her, and the UK numbers show that 2% now of the working population there are unable to work. That's a rise, like 2%. And in terms of the impacts, I mean, you're talking there about excess deaths and the clear surges at certain points, like the clearing out of the hospitals and the nursing homes, and then of course the actual arrival of the vaccine itself within weeks of arrival of the vaccine, at the start of 2021. But what's interesting is that if you look in the UK in the spring of 2021, when, just like in Ireland, everybody was ending up with a double dose of this new mRNA vaccines, there was a 39% increase in jump in ambulances being called out in the United Kingdom.
Well, Eddie, it's just
general population.
Well, now that you mentioned that, I mean, I have figures on that for Ireland, and
go ahead.
And it's called the Out of Hospital Cardiac Arrest Register. And they record their data and release it every year. The 2023 figures were released in the last couple of months.
Can you call that out again to me? I just want to take a note.
The abbreviation is OHCAR, and that stands for Out of Hospital Cardiac Arrest Register.
Okay.
And they have a website you can go in, and their reports are on it. Now, I looked at I did it last year, and I did it again recently, and I haven't written about it yet because other stuff was coming up. But the figure you just gave, I'll give you the equivalent figure in Ireland.
Go ahead.
The increase in Ireland for 2021 was their call-outs was up 21%. Okay? This is on the 2020 figure. In 2022, it was 17% up on the 2020 figure. And in 2023, it was 19% up on the 2020 figure. Now, I contacted, definitely in the last 8 weeks, the HSE for a comment on it. And I had to push for it. Now, I got a comment. I basically said, have you any explanation of why your call-outs would be up 21% in 1 year? And they gave me a load of statistics about how the population is aging so fast and putting pressure on the hospitals. And it went up 21% in 1 year, and because the population got a year older. I mean, it's insane. I mean, they don't actually believe that. I know, but they wanted me to put that out there.
Yeah, they're involved now. And look, I don't want to comment on the specific HSE employees, but I can tell you, globally, like, it's just Operation Cover Up now.
Yeah.
And it's gone on the defensive as opposed to being on the offensive. But what's interesting about those numbers is that, so you're saying that versus 2020, the call-outs for ambulances were up 21%. This is for cardiac.
Yeah.
This is just for cardiac.
Yeah.
17% in 2022 versus 2020. Yeah. And 19% in 2023 versus 2020. Yeah. Now, we have to say to ourselves that there's obviously going to be an impact on health. Leave aside excess deaths.
Yes,
there's
exactly.
Going to be an impact on health from lockdown. Because lockdown itself was a pernicious event. And when you look at the WHO, the old rules in connection with respiratory infection, you did not lock down. Because if you locked down, you created more damage to human health and the human population than you did if you allowed the respiratory virus to go through. That was the gold standard, and it was just thrown up in the air. Informed consent was trampled to death, and everybody got locked down all over the world, bar a few outliers like Sweden and other countries. So lockdown could be having an effect, but lockdown is not going to increase cardiac events by those numbers.
No.
It might increase anxiety and depression at those rates, but it's not going to increase cardiac arrest at those rates. Just common sense.
Yeah. I'll just give you the basic number, I think, for 2020 was roughly 2,400. So you are talking big numbers. So, it was up 20%. It was up around 2,900, whatever, to 2021. So that's what you're talking about.
And that's, so to be clear, that's a HSE data set, is it?
It's from that website, OCAR. And they record. They go into great detail because they want to see how many people got defibrillators before the ambulance crew arrived, survival rates, all that stuff. All that data is there, but they have the basic figures on call-outs. And
have the HSE got anything, by the way, on the Irish equivalent of VARS? The Vaccine Harm Register, which would, by the way, globally appear to be underreported by between 20 and 40 times.
Yeah,
because doctors don't bother filling in the information unless they're absolutely, completely convinced, and also because it's a pain in the ass to have to do it, and it's made to be a pain in the ass to do it.
Yeah, I think HIPAA run that site, I think. And there is, if you go in there is adverse reports on it. I think the last time I looked at it was something like 20,000. But I did an article on it one time, and I remember when I looked at it, if you divided the amount of people who got the jab, this is from memory now, by the amount of reports, and again, you this is underreported. You were talking a very big ratio when you take into account how much the underreporting is. But they make the point on that website that just because someone reports it doesn't mean the vaccine is at fault. So.
Oh yeah, but like, you can't have their cake and eat it. I mean, look at PCR tests were being used. Most of the PCR tests were creating phantom infection.
Yeah.
And the deaths, the registered, the recorded deaths, with COVID were from COVID. We all know that was a scam. That completely exaggerated the number of people dying from COVID, because the PCR test itself was never invented to do what it was applied to do.
Yeah. Well, a quick, when you're talking about COVID, Eddie, and again, I know the deaths from COVID are a nonsense, but on the recent 2022 CSO report, they have the deaths from COVID. And again, it's just from memory, but the figure for 2020, I think, was 1,900. Okay? This is recorded as a cause of death in the CSO figures. And the figure for 2022 was 1,600. Which, does anyone believe that?
No.
I mean, in all seriousness, if everything was safe and effective, how could you have 1,600 COVID deaths?
Yeah. Can we just switch topic then for a second? Have you looked at all, Patrick, at the at what's going on at the autopsy level, the autopsies, because they're claiming that we don't have enough resources to do the autopsies, but the actual markers that are available to actually go in and see, are these markers, for example, in the brain? Are they in the organs? the marker of the impact of MNRA going into the system, and they're not being examined. They're not being examined in the autopsy. So how is the autopsy supposed to determine if the death was caused by the MNRA? I mean, they're very quick to say registered deaths from COVID, but they're not so fast to go in after the evidence that the MNRA may be causing, may be killing people.
Well, they won't do that, Eddie. You know they won't do it. And the government is not going to step in and say that the pathologist should be doing it. No coroner has stepped forward and made a recommendation that it should be happening. They make all
Why
sorts.
not? I mean, spell it out. Why not, in your opinion?
Well, they're part of the system, Eddie. I mean, they're not going to make that. That would upset the whole apple cart. I mean, imagine the problems that would cause. First of all, the amount of work. If there was any doubt, did the vaccine cause the death? That you have to pathologically examine the person this way. You're creating the work, and you're creating a problem that you don't know the extent of. I mean, we had the extent. We had a situation there. I don't want to talk about.
Well, can we just walk through that for a second, just before we move on, Patrick? So, say the government said, "Okay, we must go in now and look at the autopsies, because remember they do save samples, so they can be looked at post mortem, for evidence." So
do they save samples for everyone? Yeah.
No, they don't.
No, yeah.
Not as I understand.
Yeah.
But let's say there was a determination to do that for whatever reason. You've said there won't be. I accept that completely, certainly in the short term. But the point is that that therefore, at any autopsy through the state during this period of time cannot determine what caused the death if they're not seeking to eliminate or rule in or rule out the impact of vaccines. Then how can they determine any cause of death over the period? If you know what I'm saying. The logic of it makes no sense to me.
Eddie, you're right. They can't do it. But they don't want to do it. They come out with judgments which are kind of self-supporting. I mean, there was one recently, and I actually wrote to the Dublin coroners and got the full file on it, where a strong sea swimmer who swam in the sea every day in January 2022 was out swimming. Something happened while he was out there. He was after doing a good few stretches and he drowned. They brought him in. They did the autopsy on him, whatever. And while they were doing it, they found out, they swabbed him while he was dead and he had COVID. Now, when the inquest came along, no one could explain how this strong swimmer drowned. And it was strange. I read the inquest report. Seemingly there would be a lot of water in his lungs if he had drowned. It was very little. So one of the doctors was kind of wondering, was it a vascular or a cardiac problem that he had died of? But he hadn't died of a heart attack. They did establish that. But the final thing, the COVID is only mentioned once in passing in the report, where they said, and all the family were told, because of 2022, you had to go and do whatever you were going to do. The inquest decision was the man died by drowning. Well, that was obvious, with COVID as a contributory factor. Now, this is serious. This is a legal result coming out like that, and it was publicised. It was in the papers, and it was. I actually wondered, was that a self-serving headline, where I think it was in the Irish Times, COVID caused drowning of.
Well, presumably what's behind all this is that the indemnity that the governments have given the pharmaceutical industry presuppose that the so-called safe vaccines were safe and that they went through proper process, which we know they didn't, that there was proper safety trials done, double-blind trials, which there wasn't. It went from lab to jab in a rate of knots, and politics took over science. And now we're seeing the impact of all of that coming through. And as a consequence of that, the very same establishment cannot admit to the clear fact that there are very significant issues here, because if they admit to that, then the veil of indemnity falls and the pharmaceutical industry is exposed. And we are the pharmaceutical headquarters of the United States in Europe. So with a huge amount of our tax revenues coming from the same sector. So it's quite clear to me, when you join the dots in Ireland, that we're going to be the last country in Europe, or certainly in the Western world, or very close to it, that are actually going to come around, as they are now doing in America, and saying we're going to have to really look into all of this very closely.
Well,
who's going to do it?
Well, if we did what we should do, as you say about autopsy and all that, we would be cutting our own financial throat. That's what would be happening. Everyone knows that. And we have I can just say this. I mean, you can put whatever thoughts into it, but coming to autopsies, inquests in Dublin are so far behind. It's beyond a joke. They put out a report in May 2024 talking about 2023.
Yeah.
And there's 4 coroners in Dublin. And there was, I can't remember who got the information based on a Freedom of Information release. And there was an internal report. Basically, the 4 coroners are saying they cannot catch up with the backlog. They completed just over 500 inquests in 2023. And they said, further down the article, that they needed to do 1,200 for the foreseeable future to clear the backlog. Now, they were saying the hold-up is lack of administrative staff. I don't know. I know at some stage back in 2020 and 2021, they were getting in accountancy offices to help in the coroners to try and clear the backlog. So whether this is deliberately not to give the Dublin coroners, I think, would might up to a third of the inquests in Ireland, and because you have a load, every county has their own inquest, they're able to clear them a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Unless there's a problem like there was in the Roy Butler inquest. But in Dublin, they actually have, they state on their site now that you could be waiting over 2 years, and they're saying that for over 2 years. So it's probably got worse.
Can we circle back there to the Roy Butler inquest, which was in Waterford, if I recall?
It was in Cork. I think. He died in Waterford, yeah.
Oh, he died in Waterford. Okay, right. Okay.
I think it was in Cork anyway.
Okay. And what was the standout about that, and why did it get so much attention?
Well, it was held up for a long time. Like, Roy died in August 2021.
And remind people who don't know the story, he was a young man.
He was a young man. He was a very fit, healthy young man, into his sports. He was a top-class soccer player by all accounts. And I think his local club or some team he was representing was going on a trip. And he felt he had to get the vaccine to be able to travel. Now, it turns out, it's not so sure whether that was the case, that the Irish government might have led him astray in that. But he thought he had to get it. And he went and got the Johnson & Johnson jab. I think that was a one-off jab.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah, and immediately, I think within hours, he was texting his friends saying he didn't feel good. He felt sick. This went on for 3 or 4 days. He had to come home from work. He worked in Bosch and Lam. I think he had to come home from work one evening because he couldn't take it. And I think the whole record, he died within 5 days of this happening, taking the vaccine. And it's all recorded in text to his friends and his family. And it's shocking. When it was read out in the inquest, it was just shocking. There's a trail of evidence there. Surely you have to question what happened to a healthy boy that he could die of a cerebral hemorrhage within 5 days and without getting the vaccine. Now, any of the doctors that spoke, they keep using this term baffled. They couldn't understand, they couldn't explain the hemorrhage. Well, I mean, if they can't explain it, surely we can fall back on the obvious.
Yeah.
And if the obvious can't be ruled out, I think that was Sherlock Holmes' way of deciding on things. Yeah. I think we got the answer. But what happened is the coroner, and I have to be careful what I say here because I'm not reading exactly from the report, but he basically said on the balance of probability, he couldn't presume that Roy had died from any effect from the vaccine. And I think it was an open verdict given.
Yeah.
That's my knowledge of it.
But I mean, the autopsy didn't go in seeking markers to look.
No.
It was the spikes inside in the organs.
No, it didn't. I mean, that's not going to happen in Ireland. Pure and simple.
they're early stage technologies anyway in terms of their wide availability, but the science is all there.
Yeah, but surely, I mean, if a case like that happened again now, surely, I can't believe that coroner didn't make the recommendation of what you just spoke about. These samples could be sent away straight away, and it mightn't. Obviously, that person's life is over, but the analysis could show what had caused his death, and then we could say, hold on now, time to call a halt here. Now there was warning markers about that Janssen vaccine for months before Roy Butler took it. Now that's a different thing altogether. What our government got into in the meantime, I think the problems were raised in April or May, and our government wanted to, expedite.
Well, whatever the truth is of all of this, it's quite clear that it is not being examined and will not be examined by the establishment, who are in a kind of as I call it, Operation Cover Up now, which is, we don't see anything here, let's move on, nobody wants to go back there. Anyway, you're a conspiracy theorist, tinfoil hat, blah, blah, blah. And, I mean, that they can maintain that sort of spin forever, right? Well, nearly forever. But, and this is a big problem, the ordinary population who meet in the coffee shops and pubs and GA clubs throughout the country are all talking to one another, and they're talking about people that they know who've had sudden turns of cancer coming back, who've had immune system on the floor, with the markers showing that, the IgG4 markers coming up, which show that the immune system is literally collapsing. And therefore, all these minor illnesses are beginning to pop up with a lot of people, not with everybody, but with a lot of people. And that's going to continue on, and that's the anecdotal evidence of it. And we all have members of our family and friends and networks that are talking openly now about this, that they were afraid there was omerta to talk about this or make any suggestion about this a few years ago, when we were all singing Jerusalem and doing our dances. But this is the result of it, and I think the Irish people are way ahead of the establishment reaction to it. They won't have the detail that you've been talking about or I've been talking about, but they know, they smell a rat when they smell a rat, and it's there in open sight. Now, it has to be said as well, and I'm quoting Claire Craig here as well, that bad drugs it can hurt quite a lot of people, but the vast majority of people aren't hurt. They recover from it, and that seems to be where we're going with it. That's why I asked you, was it beginning to level out? But unfortunately, we're going to be left with a very sizable population of people that have long-term health damages caused directly from the mRNA vaccines. That's just a statement of fact. Well, this is reality. Whether the establishment systems recognise it or not is really going to become an academic point.
Well, they'll see it in the hospitals, Eddie. I mean, they have to see it. And I mean, I have people in my extended family, and I understand the situation. It's affecting every family. We all know. And I just wanted to call you up on one thing. When I say it's leveling off, Eddie, say at the start of this year, January, February, we're low. And we, as a group who do this analysis, said maybe this is where the pull forward effect has kicked in, and we're going to come back to, at some stage we should be going into negative excess deaths, because so many deaths have been pulled forward. So
just explain the pull forward thing there to people.
Well, in the normal run of, as a population gets older, people are going to die, like you said, an extra amount. Now just say we put a figure of 500, we're expecting to die next year because of the aging population, the 500 extra. If 1,000 die and they're not younger people, they're just older people who have been brought forward.
Yeah.
That 500, and this has been not being glib, can only die once. So if this keeps happening, at some stage you're going to reach a point where at this age group, there's nothing left to die.
Mm. Can I ask you then finally, Patrick, just to focus on young people, young relative to us, by the way, let's put that one out there, but stating the obvious. But the CSO have occasionally do a report, and you were drawing attention to it where, this is looking at the mortality from the age group 15 to 24, which is very young. I know the data set will be small, but this was 2022 versus 2020. The number seems to be very sizable. I mean, the increase in mortality in that age group seems to be.
Yeah, what I did, Eddie, first of all, it was the 2022 Vital Statistics Annual Report, which...
That's a CSO. That's a CSO.
Yeah, and that's a major report. That comes out in October every year, 22 months behind, and it has deaths by cause of death and age group. Now, it wouldn't have every death because a lot of inquests wouldn't be gone through. But just to come to your figures there, what I did for the younger age groups between 15, I did a 15, 24, 25, 34, 35, 44 and 45, 54, is I removed from the total deaths in these age groups, I removed external deaths. External deaths are suicides, car accidents, other accidents, and stuff like that, which can be random deaths of healthy people.
So what would you call these then? Medical deaths, I suppose?
Yeah, these are what's left then is medical deaths. And you can go into the CSO site and they'll tell you they died of neoplasms or cardiac problems or circulatory problems. But these are all medical deaths.
Is it just a fancy name for cancer, is it?
Neoplasms, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the neoplasms is cancer. For some reason they put in malignant neoplasms. I don't know what the difference is, but anyway. But so what you're left with when you take out the external deaths, which are all grouped together under one codes, into the same codes, is you're left with medical deaths. Now, in the 15 to 24 age group we're talking about, now again, I haven't the exact figure here, but from memory, because it's stuck in my memory, in 2022, I think we had 83 medical deaths. And I think in 2020 it was 45.
So that's a 77% increase.
Yeah. And the figure for 2021, I think, was 73 or 74, which came out at about a 49% increase. So something changed in 2021. Now, that's they're off small. That's a percentage of a small base, which I know can.
Yeah. You have to be careful of that.
Yeah, you have to be careful.
These are all like these are all just kind of flags.
Yeah, exactly. They're the canary in the mine. They're the canary in the mine. And I looked at the other age groups as well. And just to give you a rough idea again, the 25 to 34 age group was up 24% in 2022 compared to 2020. The 35 to 44 year age group was up 7%, and the 45 to 54 year old age group was up 12%. So these are all age groups under 55, which they're supposed to be medically healthy. And I know people will die in them age groups, but something seems to have happened to change it in 2021. And again, you're right. They're just markers. They're the canary in the mine that says, hold on now.
It's not just in the Irish data. It's consistent with stuff happening around the world where there seems to be a particular issue with young people. And Eddie, you can speculate about what that issue is, but I mean, it seems to have hurt them.
But you can extend that out as well. Like the point you made about earlier, for every death, there's 4 people with getting debilitating diseases or whatever. So, you multiply them figures by 4, you're getting some idea of what's happening in our workforce. And we're seeing it all around us. The amount of people who tell me that such a colleague won't be back working for months or whatever, it's just off the scale. And that's
the number for the UK is 2% of the working age population are long term now, not more.
Yeah,
that seems to be the spillover of the same thing, But look, I think what's going to happen, if we just wrap it up, Patrick, what seems to me going to happen is that people like you and people like me and others and doctors and whoever else is involved, scientists looking at it, speculating, and the argument back will be, correlation isn't causation.
Oh yeah.
But actually it is if you build up enough, stuff, because the alternative is that, it makes no sense whatsoever, because how are you going to explain it otherwise? But I mean, these are all tropes, I just regard that as a trope now, because what needs to happen here is that that real science, not political science, politicized science, politicians need to have nothing to do with this. Real scientists need to come in and look at all of this and produce real scientific results across the whole thing. I mean, that's the only solution. And the big problem we face is that the medical community have lost public trust globally, including in Ireland. They've just lost it. And, it's been lost. It's been lost in America, but the big changes there. The damage that COVID has caused beyond all of the stuff we've been talking about is trust, the trust of the people. how can we ever trust again? And especially now that we can see Operation Cover-Up in operation. Nobody wants to talk about this. Mainstream media want to talk about it. RT don't want to talk about it. The people that, vilified and they vilified and demonized those that wouldn't take the vaccine. Well, we're now seeing studies which clearly show that the vaccinated population are much less healthy than the unvaccinated population.
Yeah, I think, what you're talking about is basically the Irish state, which is not going to happen, investigating itself properly, using proper scientific research and statistical research about the dying and the disabilities.
Yeah.
Now, that's not going to happen. But you know as well as I do, the independent scientific work has been done to basically, I think it's proven at this stage that the vaccines have caused untold deaths and untold disabilities. So
I can just draw viewers' attention to an interview I did recently with Professor Angus Dalgleish.
That's right, I saw that. Very good, yeah.
Like an oncologist, virologist and immunologist. And he's been on the board of an mRNA company, and he's saying, we have to stop all mRNA injections. They're basically unfit for human health, and they're damaging the immune system. We have to stop now. And you have to rely on top people, top credibility when they say these things, without having to rely on people like you and me, who are kind of just common sense, critical thinkers, trying to stitch it all together and struggling to do it through a complete veil of propaganda on the other side, and tropes, and being targeted to try and get the information out to the Irish people. Patrick, I just want to thank you for what you're doing, because it takes a lot of resilience and courage to do it. Now, I know things are changing now that, COVID is more in the rearview mirror, but its effects aren't. Its long-term effects are with us.
Well, that's the truth, Eddie. Never mind, the dying is still going on, the disabilities. But we've got a problem. And I didn't see this. I thought when this whole thing what was causing the problems, and not that I was going to break it, but at some stage it was going to break, that people would rise up in a certain extent and turn on the politicians. It's not happening. People cannot put through process what has happened here. They can tell you, yes, I will not get another vaccine because they killed my mammy, or this, that, and the other, or they caused a disability. They can process that. But the next step of saying that they were duped, they let themselves be duped, and they fell for it through the mainstream media and the Irish government, they just can't go there. A lot of them can't go there, because it means, especially in the health community, because it undermines their whole life. They've studied to be doctors and nurses to help people. It used to be a vocation. I think it long ago stopped being a vocation. That doesn't mean they wanted to harm people, but they found themselves, they were on the tip of the arrow, being used by whether it's outside forces or the Irish government to enforce something that has caused severe problems. And that must be very hard for them to take. But they've got to man up. I know there is a few great people. I won't start mentioning a few because I might leave out one.
Yeah.
But the rest of them need to stand up and say, okay, we've got a serious problem here, and we need to investigate it.
But as you said, there's big problems. Sure, I mean, one of the medical establishments gave a medal to Fauci.
Yeah.
And Micheál Martin handed a photograph in the newspaper within the last number of months in 2024. So there's a big there's a big jump needs to be taken. But I mean, hopefully, new leadership will start emerging, coming through. I think not just medical in the medical area, but journalism, academics, that young people especially saying this is a load of codswallop. We need to completely change the whole thing. But we're years away from that effect coming through. But one of the things that will be required in the medical profession, and they're well able to do it, is to have a kind of a truth commission, and just say, well, let's just come forward, let's just spell it out, let's get the catharsis out of the way, because we know of all populations in the world that lifting up the national carpet and burying all this thing underneath it, which is what we did during our period of clerical fascism, which on for decades. Look at the results. Look at the mental trauma, the suicide, the problems that were created from not dealing with the reality and creating a national illusion of perfectness. And we're at it again. I actually see significant parallels between the sort of learned ignorance of those days, agnogenesis, and what's actually after happening over the last 2 years and continues to happen. It's let choose ignorance is the sort of the reflex, and it's a very damaging, dangerous thing to do, either on an individual basis for your health or on a national basis.
Eddie, my point all along has been, unless we have a reckoning of everything that's happened, and what I mean by a reckoning is you apply blame, you say where you got it wrong, you deliberately got it wrong, or whatever reason, you've got to apply blame to what happened here. Thousands of people have died that shouldn't have. Thousands of people are injured that shouldn't be. Somebody has to be to blame. And I didn't think of the idea that you used to come up with would be fantastic if some medical association decided they were going to do it. With the way they're treating some of the doctors that stood up, I think that's very unlikely. But if they did stand up and made that stand and said they were going to do it independent of any government inquiry, it would show great leadership and might encourage other organisations to step forward.